welcome everyone to the Capital Mind podcast. If you'd like to know more about us, visit capitalmind.in. And if you'd like to invest with us, do visit capitalmindwealth.com.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as the basis for investment decisions. Clients of Capital Mind may maintain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast.
Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 28 of the Capital Mind podcast. A few of us have trickled back into the office, and for now, life is slowly coming back to normal in Bangalore. Well, at least for the time being. It's been a month since our last podcast, and when you look around, the real economy still looks like it's in terrible pain, and there are distressing news updates and images every day. The stock market, on the other hand, well, it has regained some of its lost ground. We closed above 10,000 on the Nifty for a few days in a row, and rumors on Twitter and everywhere else have it that some of all that FII money that caused this crash in the first place, well, it started coming back. On the macroeconomic side, there was this big news item a couple of weeks ago where there was a 20 lakh crore economic package, which now everyone seems to say isn't remotely close to 20 lakh crores. But after it was announced, well, either in spite of it or because of how it was structured, Moody's has downgraded India's foreign currency debt to Baa3, which is apparently the lowest investment grade possible. And in doing so, it's joined S&P and Fitch, which had already and had historically been holding us at this low rating level up to this point anyway. Now, Deepak, you're not very impressed with Moody's, and when they upgraded us back in 2017, you were fairly disdainful. You're now equally disdainful, and you're even fighting about this on Twitter. So can you tell me what's going on here? Have you not forgiven these rating agencies for their mistakes in 2008? Or is there something more to it?
Well, Shray, it's been like an interesting 12 years since then. Rating agencies which were so wrong in 2008 are continuing to be wrong, and we suddenly seem to give them a lot more power than they should have, despite them having been wrong so long. So while we've had people like rating agencies tell us that they liked or did not like something, there is a tremendous amount of power we've given them, although they're just a source of opinion, right? So they've told us that India should be rated Baa3 or whatever number they've decided to give us. But that really tells the world really what they think of India. If it stopped there, it would be okay, because a lot of people tell the world what they think of India and we don't necessarily care. And sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong, take a good thing with that. But we actually think of it as an opinion. You go on TV, you go on primetime TV and you find 20 anchors, they will have 20 different opinions. And you say, well, each one has an opinion, that's what it is. And somebody can say, in the lockdown, we're going to have 600,000 cases. Another fellow will say 100,000 cases. One of them will turn out to be right. And you take the same opinions 6 days later, you find this person who was right the first time was wrong the second time. We don't find this as a problem, right? So rating agency is just one of those. Except in this case, their opinion, we consider them to be more informed. My disdain from them comes from the fact that they don't do things the way that a rating agency is maybe supposed to or required to do. For instance, they don't downgrade on time. They keep their ratings too high for too long. As an example, the earliest example is 2001 perhaps, when Enron was downgraded. Literally 3 days before it went bankrupt. The whole world knew Enron was in trouble. The rating agencies didn't downgrade them until it was 2 days before it kind of went bankrupt. And pretty much everybody knew by that time that the end was nigh or near. But the other point that they do on the other side is a lot of companies that are good, or a lot of countries that are good, they don't give them, they create an artificial framework that pushes them lower down for no fault of theirs or for no reason at all. So they don't downgrade the bad players which already have good ratings. They don't upgrade the good players that have bad ratings, and they don't actually have a level playing field. To give you an example, today also India is rated worse than Spain. Spain has a much higher debt to GDP, nearly 100%, probably going to get much more after the crisis. Its fiscal deficit. India's, by the way, debt to GDP officially is about maybe 65%. Even if you take it at a higher level, which includes a lot of other stuff, it's 70%, 75%. So India is nowhere close to 99-100% of GDP, which is what Spain is at. Spain's fiscal deficit was at 10% in 2012. It was at 10% in 2008. It's reduced it over time, over a period. India's has been like 3.5, 4, or at the most 4 in the last 7 or 8 to 10 years. We've actually gone down. Now it's all going to increase, but so is every single country. Spain has been consistently rated higher than India. It has seen more bank failures than India has. It has seen more issues with unemployment, more other issues, political, economic, and yet they keep their ratings high. The rating agencies keep their ratings high. Now, why is this? If you think of emerging market countries, so you're talking about India, Russia, Brazil, and all that stuff, and you look at the developed economies, of which Spain is one, there's a bunch of others as well. They do not get the same treatment as the developing countries. In the sense, if you look at any of these parameters, India scores better, but India gets a horrible rating. A lot of other countries get a much higher rating, but they don't have anywhere close to the flexibility. And remember, India is a young nation, and a lot of other things that work in our favor. I'll talk about it in some time, but there's no standardization, right? So if you took the same parameters and measured two countries, you'd suddenly say, wait, India needs to be rated higher or those countries need to be rated lower. But since there's no standardization, you are an opinion without proper data. You wear suits as rating agencies, but you don't actually come across as very intelligent, because if you downgrade or upgrade, and I talked about this during the upgrade as well, saying that, listen, they're really stupid, but they're a little bit less stupid now that they've actually upgraded India a little bit, because now they've brought us even closer. But we're still, at that time when they did upgrade us, we were rated lower than Portugal and Spain again at that time, which almost sounded to me like, listen, those guys are in the throes of pain and India is not. In 2017 it was not, and yet even after our upgrade we were a few notches lower. So I don't think we should give them the kind of importance that we do.
Well, okay, you clearly don't like them, but let's get to that importance part. Who gives them this importance? Was it just a slow news day and everyone was just talking about it? Or, I mean, is there someone who actually listens to this and is like, oh my God, I need to do something about this? Because, yeah, sure, as you said, they can be an opinion. So who is giving them this importance that seems to be bothering you when I talked about it?
Yeah, so here's the interesting thing about rating agencies. If they were only an opinion, I wouldn't have cared. And perhaps I shouldn't either. But the problem really is that their rating actually carries some weightage in the economic world. And what is that weightage? Now, people have decided that these rating agencies are good at rating companies or countries for some reason. Let's say that reason is unfounded, but that concept has always remained, that these guys can rate companies. Now, the regulators and the countries of the world have decided that when we give people, like when they rate countries a certain level, that they should be given some higher degree of importance. A bank lending to a company which has a AAA rating has less capital requirement. So if I lend money to a company which is, say, 100 crores and it's a AA rated company, I will have to put, say, 0.75% against that loan. So that means 75 lakhs of my capital is stuck because I've given a loan of 100 crores to a company that's rated AA. But if I gave it to a low company that was rated AAA, I would have to put only 50 lakhs behind. Now, I have a limited amount of capital. Let's say I have 10 crores of capital. I could lend to 20 companies which are AAA rated, but only 12 or 13 companies which are AA rated, and possibly only 3 or 4 companies that are A or maybe BBB rated. So you look at your capital and say, listen, I'll put a lot of my money, a lot of my money to higher rated companies, not because they're better companies, but because they are rated highly. And although I know that these companies may not necessarily be great companies because credit rating agencies have been wrong so often, I will actually have to allocate my money in that way. So you incentivize me to buy investment grade versus speculative grade debt. And because of this, they get a higher legal sanction than just an opinion. Take an example. Why do you not like Franklin today? You said Franklin mutual funds have gone and done bad things. They don't call them bad things because they've invested in bad companies. Maybe some companies are bad. But the companies that people are worried about are actually the higher rated ones. Franklin's hated today because it invested in A-rated, BB-rated debt instead of AA and AAA kind of rated debt. The ones that have defaulted in the recent past that have made news, ILFS was rated AAA 1 month before it defaulted. DHFL was rated AAA almost all the way until it defaulted. So the AAA has almost nothing to do with the default risk, whereas the concept of a rating is supposed to say increased or decreased risk of default. And then, if I can't trust your rating to protect me in case of a default, then you fail when I need you the most, right? So from a regulatory perspective, we are rewarding people who invest in companies the rating agencies call AAAs. If we, for instance, as an India, as a country, is now slipping one more notch in the opinion of whoever, a rating agency like Moody's or Fitch or S&P, we then fall into something called speculative grade. In speculative grade, a lot of pension funds may say, listen, we are not allowed to invest in speculative grade bonds because our mandate says only investment grade. Then you have to pull out of India. So you now have a second layer of importance because some people have decided that the rating agencies are good and therefore, there is in that. There's another thing about loan covenants. I'll come to that at a later date. But the fear right now, and I think a lot of people are expressing this, oh my God, if we are rated so low, will pension funds not invest in Indian debt? That's the question they're asking. This is really surprising to me.
Well, yeah, it is surprising to me because do pension funds even care about Indian debt? We just did a podcast a couple of weeks ago or whatever the last one was, where you talked about how we just make it very difficult and in general aren't happy with foreigners owning a lot of our debt. I mean, is this a problem? I mean, it's only the foreign currency debt that's been downgraded. And if no one cares, then why do we care? I mean,
it's amazing because the amount of action that foreign investors have in the equity markets, worthwhile seeing. They're very big players. They're almost non-entities when it comes to debt.
In India.
In the debt markets in India, for instance, they can't even buy Indian debt without having, there are certain limits to how much they can own. Those limits have been increased recently, but there are certain limits, and those limits are such tiny that they're so tiny that you'll almost get shocked. Okay, let me give you an example. India has about 60 lakh crores of central government debt in rupees. That means the central government bonds that they have printed, all added up is about 60 lakh crores.
So $800 billion.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
And then if foreigners really wanted to buy our debt, the maximum they can buy is 2.34 lakh crores, which is roughly $30 billion?
Yeah. So less than 5%.
Less than 5%. Around 4% of all government long-term debt can be bought by foreigners. And the amount that they can buy is maximum 4%. They currently own less than half of that.
So they've not even used their limited quota.
They haven't used their limits as well. Their limits, so they own about 1.2 lakh crores, which is roughly about $13 billion of debt. To give you an example of size, the US, forget the ones that own the treasuries, but BND, which is the total bond market ETF, is $54 billion in size. The total amount of debt that can be owned of India by all foreigners put together is less than 1/4 right now, or not can be, but is currently owned by foreigners, which is about $12 or $13 billion, is less than 1/5 the amount in one single ETF in the US. There's others, LOD, 49 billion.
I think it's LQD.
LQD, sorry. And that's TLT, which is 18 billion. TLT is US 20-year plus. That means US bonds which are 20-year plus to maturity is 18 billion. That's more in that one fund than all of the foreigners that own current Indian debt altogether.
Worldwide.
Worldwide. Added up. So we are like the size of a small US ETF. The problem right now is if they took out all of this money, that's what the fear is, right? They'll take out all their money. They'll take out 100,000 crores, 1 lakh crores in total. That is like a few weeks of issuance, and really that is so tiny that literally any of the banks could buy their bonds and kind of sit on them. The larger banks like SBI or one of the insurance companies, and it wouldn't even figure in the overall scheme of things. This is basically so small a role that FIIs play or foreign investors play in the whole picture, that the fear that a credit downgrade will make them run away from Indian debt is so unfounded, it's laughable. But also we have to we have to look at the fact that they've never been interested or aren't interested in Indian debt in any meaningful way.
So I was going to ask that. So is that because Indian debt is just unattractive to them because of whatever reasons, or have we managed to create enough hoops that they just don't find it worth it?
Well, a bit of both. So here's where the hoops part is, right? So we definitely create hoops. Why do they have limits? They used to have to bid earlier for, that means, to buy your debt, I have to buy a ticket that allows me to buy your debt. And I'm going to pay for the ticket first, and then I'm going to pay for your debt. So that's what they used to do earlier. Now we've eased that approach, but there's still limits. Okay, so there's this 2,35,000 crores limit, but within that limit, there's you can only buy for more than 3 years maturity. You want to buy less than 3 years maturity, then you can buy 10% that's less than 3 years maturity, as long as 90% of yours is more than 3 years maturity. And what happens if something that is 3 years maturity yesterday has become 2 years and 364 days of maturity today? Oh no, you can't sell that to another FII. You have to find a local guy because the FII can't buy because now it is less than 3 years to maturity. So all these loopholes have, not loopholes, but rules. They've actually designed a maze that, would figure in a Harry Potter Triwizard tournament before people would be able to buy our debt. So yes, I mean, they struggle to buy our debt. So we make it difficult for them. But then it's also the fact that we don't, because not for historical reasons, don't like to borrow from foreigners as a government. Yeah. So sovereign debt itself is, most of this debt has actually been denominated in rupees, not dollars. So the total foreign debt, which means debt owned by foreigners of the central government, is roughly $109 billion, right? So of this, maybe $15 billion is now rupee denominated debt. A lot of the other part of it is also rupee denominated debt. The total sovereign debt itself has come down in the last 1 year, according to recent statistics, by roughly 10%. We have Forex reserves of 450 billion. So it's not even like, listen, the dollar part of this debt, which is probably 45 to 50 billion dollars, is less than 10% of the total Forex reserves we have. So it's not even like we're stretched. The reason I'm saying the government is because what Moody's has downgraded is sovereign rupee based debt and sovereign dollar based debt. Now, dollar based debt is so small, it's insignificant. Rupees-based debt, I don't even understand why, because rupee is Indian. The rupee can be printed by the RBI to pay back if there is a problem. Of course, there have been sovereign defaults by the West in other countries, and we'll talk about those a little bit. But if you're worried that India will default, more worried than yesterday that India would default, why would you be worried that India will default in rupees? We'll always print rupees. Now, the argument is, wait. There have been 8 countries that have defaulted in their own currencies. 2 of them are Venezuela and Ecuador, both of which at those times pegged their currency to the US dollar. So since you can't print it because you've pegged it, you had to default. You had a problem with Jamaica at one point. And Jamaica had two different types where what they said was, listen, we can't pay back. We'll just convert you to a longer term security. And then whoever takes the swap allows, is therefore, so since most of the countries agree to take a swap, that was fine. And despite the fact that everybody did take the swap, it's considered a default. So it's a technical of some sort. There was Ukraine and Russia. Russia was a serious problem. But what Russia did was not to say, I won't pay you back your money. They paid everybody back after 5 years. They put the money into a special account. That account was allowed to stay around in rubles. The ruble depreciated a lot. But what they allowed that money to do was to go and buy ruble-denominated stocks in the Russian stock market. Almost everybody took that option, made out like bandits in 5 years. So by 2003, when people were able to get out of that Russian default. So it's not even like when countries default in their own currencies that there was a loss of any significant times to a percentage to any of the players that were involved. The best thing is India has never defaulted. India has never defaulted on a rupee loan by the government. The time that it did have a problem at some point in time was about their dollar borrowings, not about their rupee borrowings. And the fact, all these factors put together should say, listen, at least give this country a higher rating for their rupee debt. Why are you giving them a Baa3 on their rupee debt? But the answer is, it's not uniform the way they look at India versus they look at Europe or they look at Japan or they look at the US. Think about the fact that our current account deficit is now at the lowest ever. If you think about, people, foreigners coming in and saying, listen, we'll give India money and then we'll never be able to take it out. One of the reasons why the rupee depreciates perhaps is because, the current account deficit is very high. The current account deficit is not. And here's a structural difference. India's current account consists of imports and exports and, remittances and stuff like that. So what we do when we import and export is stuff that we import is merchandise. Part of that merchandise is something called non-monetary gold. We import gold. It's one of our largest imports, probably second largest, maybe third now. And we export, refined oil and services and computer technology services. And we also, of course, get remittances from Indian workers abroad. All of this, if you add up, but if you remove the gold part, we are actually in a current account surplus. So what is gold? Why is gold special? Now, gold is actually a capital thing, right? Yeah. Right? Because if you think about people buying gold, they don't buy it to use it. They buy it to save it and store it as a store of value. So it's a capital asset. But worldwide, other countries, not India, has decided that gold is a capital asset, is the current asset, not a capital asset. So any import of gold should be considered in the current account. But if you remove gold, remember, India has the right, with so much gold in the country, that if we were allowed to export gold, and we're not allowed to export gold because of an archaic British era rule. This factor means that gold can only be imported, and if you take that out, the CAD is positive. So if your CAD is positive, that means the hit on your currency is not major. If you change the way gold is processed or accounted for, India is actually current account positive. So if that's the case, then are we really worried about a current account deficit in any meaningful way? I don't think we should be. Here's another thing. People tell you government accounts are in bad shape. Who isn't in bad shape? Britain? I mean, if you look at these things, you'll come back and say, well, India sounds like a great place to be. India's total money supply is less than GDP. China's is probably 3 or 4 times GDP. America's is 1.5 times GDP. So if you have a country whose money supply in entirety is less than its GDP, its debt cannot be greater than its GDP almost by definition to a certain extent. But there is basically the point that India's central government debt is relatively a much smaller percentage of GDP than it used to be. Even if it were to say 12 lakh crores is required, there is absolutely no reason to worry, because 12 lakh crores would add only another maybe 4 or 5% of GDP temporarily until the government got back into shape. Whereas most other countries are talking about 20, 15, 16% of GDP being lost in the lockdown and the COVID related disasters. Here's the other thing. We announced a 20 lakh crore stimulus, but hardly any of that money is going out today. In fact, almost nothing is going out today. There's no stimulus of any meaningful sort. Everybody talks about stimulus, but all we've stimulated is the media, the GDP by the media trying to figure out where this 20 lakh rupees is going to be spent, because it's not. It's only guarantees and somebody else will take debt and I will return you your tax which I owed you anyway. So, things like that. So why are we getting downgraded? If you've got a country like this, we also have a parallel economy in cash that we never liked. And it's helped us in times like this, because this informal economy provides the lowest level credit that is required to get economies back into shape. And that is a well-oiled system in India. People borrow from chit funds. That money is used in buying goods and services from an informal vendor. And those goods and services form a reasonable part of the lower end backbone of this country. So you got that, which doesn't exist in any meaningful form abroad. So the government there has to stimulate as much. Here you got, private sector perhaps that can. And if you're downgrading, why are we more likely to default compared to what? To Spain, to France, to Italy? Look at their books. I would say they're in much worse shape than India. And if India is to recover, and if the West is to recover, they will require a lot of spending by the government. India will require a lot lesser, almost by definition, because India does better on its own. It always has, and the government has never really spent on the country. So the economy, the reasons they tell you often is, don't compare it to the US where it's a reserve country. Don't compare it to Spain. Have you seen the kind of development Spain has? But my answer to these questions is, you'll always have a reason, right? You can always shift goalposts and tell me that, you can't compare against this. Tomorrow you'll tell me I can't even compare against Bangladesh, because Bangladesh is a smaller country. So the point about having an opinion is that if I don't like your opinion on TV, I will switch the channel and move somewhere else. In a rating agency, I'm forced to look at your opinion because my regulators tell me that your opinion matters. Now, my point about this is, take that away. Then your opinion becomes another TV channel which I can switch off and cut the cord. And not because I don't like what he is saying, but because I believe you're wrong. And I can continue to believe that.
I think you mentioned this really funny anecdote where just a year ago, where Airtel was downgraded, and after that there's been pretty good movement in both its debt and its equity. In a favorable direction. So you're almost saying that some market participants almost take these rating agencies as like reverse signals or counter indicators. Which
is very important. So Airtel got a downgrade on Feb 6th, I think 2019, and if you look at its bonds, it's done phenomenally. Okay, if its stock price is up double from that time. The bond prices are also significantly up. So if you invested in their bonds at that time, you would have made 14 to 15%. Now people will tell you, if I'd invested in other emerging market country bonds, I would have got better. That's not relevant, right? Because if somebody downgrades, then people should be selling. They're not. They're in fact buying more of it, and they're buying a significant amount. Sorry. But here is where I think it's where it gets very interesting. Because rating agencies act so late, by the time they've actually downgraded, it's possible that the company is actually now in much better shape. It's also possible that the company goes down completely, but the market determines that. So what happens is, the regulatory lesson may be one part, but since market participants understand this, Enron was going down 1.5 months before it was downgraded, because market participants knew. They said, forget the rating agencies, we don't believe them anymore. What happened in 2008? In 2008, the rating agencies would highlight a company, a bond, a set of bonds, and say these are AAA. Except when the market participants realized what's underlying is really a lot of crap or a lot of really bad stuff, they automatically reprice the securities downward. So the price in the market already started to go down a long time before the rating agency started to downgrade. So it's almost like a contra-indicator in a way that says by the time the rating agencies have gotten to it, either it's time for it to recover or it's time for it to have already been dead. So that part is out there. In fact, India's past downgrades have resulted in stock markets going up almost every single time. So maybe we should view this as a bullish event,
I'd like to dig into those. Like as you just said, sometimes they're too. I'm still remembering the things from 2008, where basically, in a sense, you almost felt that they were biased because the person paying them was in a sense rating shopping, and so they really had to stretch themselves to get the right rating. Or in some cases, you've just said that they're late, and it's almost because they don't want to say what everyone else already knows because they're scared it'll make things worse. So could you just dig into a bit, like, look, what are the problems these rating agencies really face? And look, whoever you create in its place or advise for in its place, surely they'll also have these same problems. So what is the alternative?
So let me start with the beginning, first part of the question, saying what are their incentives? Okay, so if you look at rating agencies, who pays them? First, they're paid by the company themselves. Of course, country rating agencies are not paid by anybody. But let's say I'm Enron, I am the one that's paying you to rate me. So if you don't rate me high enough, I'm going to go to somebody else. So there's rating shopping.
Yeah, there is that tension.
Yes,
it's been highlighted.
Because you also don't want to lose my revenue, you'll rate me highly based on some kind of Excel sheet that I, as an MBA, have made. Or say, let's say.
Fair enough.
At that time, you don't find any reason to refuse me that because the logic seems sound. Now, the second part is something called loan covenants, and I talked about this earlier. So let's say I've taken a loan from you and you've given me 100 crore rupees. But you've said, listen, as long as your rating is AAA, your interest rate is 6%. If your rating falls to AA, I'm going to charge you 8%. If your rating falls to A, I'm going to charge you 10%. Now let's say there's a rating agency that's looking at me as a company and saying, listen, this company it's going to struggle to pay back its interest or its principal. It downgrades me to AA. If I couldn't pay my interest at 6%, what are the chances I'll be able to pay it at 8%? No, so I'll go down to another notch to A. Suddenly, your action to rate me has made me worse than I was. So in a way that, the idea of, the Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, if you may, the action of observing something changes it. The fact is, the action that you take in order to rate me has now affected my viability in the first place. So it's a downward spiral going down, right? So if rating agencies know this, think of yourself as a rating agency. If I downgrade him, Deepak Shray, he will go bankrupt. It's not that I'm downgrading Deepak Shray from AAA to AA. The minute I downgrade him from AAA to AA, I might as well downgrade him to default because he's going to go there. So knowing that, you will delay your downgrade as much as possible because you want to keep anybody from calling their loans on me early or exercising loan covenants that hurt me. So this problem.
So, I mean, this is an unusual set of constraints, right? These folks operate under. Maybe this is where you were going with. It's not appropriate to give them this legal sanction because there's the fact that they are still subject to market pressures like price shopping and our rating shopping, and they have this added responsibility that when things are looking bad, they need to sometimes hold back before. It's like every time it matters, you can't use them.
Yeah, I mean, and the weird thing is the regulatory sanction is what has hurt. These companies. Now, if they were non-regulated, so in sense there was no. So this is my solution to it as an alternative.
Yeah, what is the alternative?
So the alternative wise, we're saying, okay, let's look at the lockdown. Somebody dictated to us that we can't go to a shop between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m.
Yeah.
Now, this was okay during a lockdown, but what if somebody told you this in normal times and you're looking at them and saying, listen, I want to go to a shop at 9 p.m. Why are you stopping me? So if my answer to you to that is, what are you shopping for at 9 p.m. and why can't you do it before 7 p.m.? I can ask you that question anytime, right? So you're looking at me and saying, free country. I want to be able to do it whenever I want. So if it's normal times, I want to shop when I want. Of course, you've determined that beyond 11:30, the shops don't want to be open, or there's a limit to it policemen can do. And I'm acceptable at 11:30, but I'm not acceptable for a 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. permanent curfew. Why? Because you want the freedom to, you have the freedom to think. You don't want somebody else to ask you a question, why aren't you doing this before 7 p.m.? Right? So why can't we do the same thing with our money? Who is a rating agency to tell me where I should put my money or where I should not? Because indirectly they are dictating where my money can go. Why can't I be intelligent enough? And why am I going on their shoulder and saying, I thought I trusted these rating agencies, the buggers gave me a AAA and now look, it's defaulted. I mean, I shouldn't be allowed to say that as a person who's managing either your own money or either somebody else's money, like a banker or a mutual fund manager, who gives you the freedom to say that I depended on this rating agency's opinion, so therefore it's a rating agency's problem. You can never say that, right? So
that won't fly.
You've got to be smart enough. So my fund has take away the rating agency's power to in any way influence the collateral or the company itself, which means that there should not be any regulatory forbearance. Go in there, every loan is given 1%. If the company looks really bad to you, mark it 2%. But I will not give you any forbearance from a regulatory saying, oh, if it's AAA, you can put less. If it's AA, you can put more. Nothing of that sort. Throw it all out the window and say, everybody gets a standard 0.5%. If you guys don't identify, if you guys want to use a rating agency, the buyer of the loan, rather than the company itself, the banker, the mutual fund manager, he pays. And he then gets a rating and then uses that rating to determine whether he has to put higher capital or lower capital to it. But that will change the concept of rating shopping in the first place. It will ensure that rating is independent. And because of the regulatory restriction that says we will not allow anything to be based on rating, not even a loan covenant, you will actually end up with a system that has actually independent rating agencies, and you can actually believe their opinions a little bit more. So
they can actually then say what they really think as opposed to having to hold back.
Yes, and I think all of these other regulations will go away. Of course, they will hate it because suddenly they become much less viable businesses, because I might say, I know this company better than the rating agency does. Many times people do, and that's why they buy these companies, right? So people who buy junk bonds, they're not necessarily ignorant. The concept of junk is because their rating is less than investment grade. They're called junk graded companies, but they're actually pretty good. Carnival Cruises, which has been managing cruises for all this time, recently, till recently, of course, they were a very famous company. They were a junk bond company because they used to issue bonds, which the rating agencies would say, very risky, very risky, very risky. And then they would pay 14% or 13% on their loans. Recently, they've issued more bonds, and the Fed has said, I don't care whether a rating agency calls you junk or not, I'm going to still buy your bonds. They're buying those bonds. People are saying the Fed is a bad person for buying junk bonds. Yet, because of their action, Carnival Cruises has been rescued at a much lower price and eventually may be able to continue to operate and keep its 1,000, 2,000 jobs in line just because of this action. So, rating agencies somehow cease to have importance for the regulators when those things happen, but they continue to give them importance in other things. So, I just feel, we actually create in India also different set of problems. Gold loan companies where gold is backed underlying the loans that they give, they get a AA rating. Why? Because of some past history, this and that and all that stuff. But you technically, at the same time, you give another company which is unsecured loans, secured against nothing. Microfinance companies and all that. Some of these companies, even real estate companies who have 30% exposure to developers who are in deep, deep trouble today, those companies get a AAA. whereas a gold loan company gets a AA. So it's almost like there's a different standard. You're almost saying, listen, I can't trade that AAA company because, the owner of that company is like this big shot who will perhaps, have me sentenced to death or something. But I mean, because that's the kind of fear that goes around in the markets. Nobody downgrades the more popular players. But at the same time, I would say still that there is a tremendous amount of good research that these guys do. Every once in a while it does come out. It's not to say that they're the only people doing good research. There is good research that's done by them. I have often found that when they don't downgrade or upgrade, they just kind of say, oh, we're continuing the rating. The subtext of the notes that they give in their rating documents has enough information for you to be able to make financial decisions. For instance, once there was this company, I won't name it, but they said, the promoters said they will buy more shares in the company and strengthen the company's balance sheet, but they didn't do so. Yet we continue to rate it the same. I'm like, dude, I don't care about your rating, but that one statement is enough for me to say I'm getting out of this company right now. So it's useful in a way that maybe they didn't intend it to be. But since my respect for them is not so much, I don't really care about what they think of what I think of them. So, in that way, it really makes. One of the other things over here is the trust deficit is quite high. In the sense, what you call high, I don't care about. What you call low, I don't care about. But I understand that because of compromises and incentives, you are not going to give me actionable information the way you think it's actionable. So I really feel that the rating agencies should change this system in which they kind of treat different things differently. There's an internal class system that they've developed, whether it is within companies or whether it is within countries. The developed countries get a different framework to work with. What they call non-developed gets a different framework to work with. Russia is a horrible rating because it defaulted at one point in time. It has 14% debt to GDP. I mean, that's almost like saying, guys, what are you exactly downgrading? And they have a worse rating than India, but the Russians don't care. So they'll probably invent their own rating agency.
About that, there were some rumors that the Chinese were trying to create a rating agency some years ago.
Yes, they have. Actually, okay. China does have its own rating agencies, and they treat debt at a very different level than they do. But the one problem with the Chinese rating agency is that they're not going to get worldwide sanction, I guess.
Yes.
Now, that's one of the, this thing, or they are going to get sanctioned worldwide. But that's more like, also the other issue is that they rate things, China has an enormous amount of data on everything internally. What they choose to tell you is very different.
Agreed. There is a trust deficit there.
At this point, if a Chinese rating agency gave you a glowing recommendation of a company, you will not believe it.
Yeah.
If it told you something was really bad, you would still again not believe it. So it's kind of like within China, they might rate things very well, but outside of China, they're not. So India also has its own rating agencies, which right now are owned almost, all of them are owned by the individual US worldwide rating companies of this thing. But like a worldwide currency, such rating agencies are only useful if everybody respects them. If the minute you lose the respect of a lot of people, it's almost like Visa. If enough people stop using Visa, Visa will immediately go bankrupt. It's almost like there's a switch beyond which Visa is completely useless, and the switch beyond which Visa has a lot of use. So rating agencies are there, right?
So I'd like to. So look, for all their flaws, do you think they're still needed? I mean, or how would you suggest? I mean, after this episode, what do you think we should think of them or make of them, or what would we? How should we consider them going forward?
So I think what's very interesting is while we keep saying this, and every once in a while they'll come out with some interesting concept saying, India, we're downgrading or upgrading or doing something and all that stuff. I think rating agencies form an important role if we remove their disincentives to give correct information, which means we remove the ability we actually regulatorily ban any concept that is related to rating that can affect a company's hierarchy, which means don't do things that are reflexive. George Soros had this term, reflexive, meaning if I rate you, And if I increase your rating, you become more attractive to the world and therefore your rating gets even further improved. But at the downward spiral, it's the other way. If I downgrade you, then my downgrade itself has caused you to become worse. And so the observer becomes the player. Remove that completely from a regulatory perspective, ban it. In the sense, say that, listen, if you have a loan covenant that is linked to the rating, I am immediately going to introduce a regulatory requirement of 10% of capital. Now, they're used to 0.5%. So 10% of capital will immediately mean they will remove the loan covenant linked to the rating agency, right? So that changes things. On the second part, I will not allow you to link it to AA, AAA and stuff like that. You have to have, everybody has to have an internal rating team that has to go in and formulate its own opinion. They can take the help of a rating agency by paying them. The company should not pay the rating agency. So you take those two things out, you suddenly form actual need for independent rating agencies, which can then, build proper insights to do this. If people don't like what a rating agency has to say, it's like a certain TV channel with a certain TV anchor that is shouting all over the place. You can switch off the TV channel and never watch it again. It is an opinion that can continue to exist without you having to listen to it at all points in time. So treat rating agencies as, TV channels with crazy anchors. That's about it. The market has already deemed them irrelevant. Markets operate independently of rating agencies, and I wouldn't be surprised if more money came into Indian debt after the rating downgrade, because till now people were fearing that, oh my God, what will happen if the rating gets downgraded? Now that it has got downgraded, the event is over. Let's get on with life because these guys were irrelevant anyway. So my thing is, as much as we've spent an entire podcast on it, it probably requires even less relevance than that. And since many smart people do work there, I'd love to see their insights in a more independent framework rather than where it is right now.
That's well put. So thanks very much, Deepak. This was awesome. And we'll look at bond interest rates going forward and seeing whether it comes right or not.
Yeah, been interesting the last few days. So I hope, we keep talking about it at Capital Mind. We have a debt masterclass. So if you guys want to understand what's happening, I think you can visit capitalmind.in. There's a debt masterclass which you can understand how debt funds operate and therefore how debt operates in general. We have Capital Mind Premium. We keep talking about all of this stuff. So, my plug for Capital Mind Premium is please come in, subscribe, take a trial, 15 days of content available for you. And as macro situations develop, we'll have a lot more in terms of podcast content and premium portfolio level action that will also coincide with this. But at this point, I'd love to, thanks a ton, Shray, and it's been great starting this podcast with a 1 month hiatus. Hopefully, we'll do more as news evolves as well.
Sure. On that note, see you next time.